Welcome to the Swayam portal of online refresher course in philosophy under MHRD, Government of India. Today we will discuss the module on the theme Realism versus Idealism from Western perspective. Suppose you are looking at a laptop screen. Pixels are shining and altering before your eyes, creating patterns that your mind transmutes into words and sentences. These sentences and ideas are in your mind. But the computer, the server, the pixels and your eyeballs are all objects in the external world, outside your mind. Now the question arises that whatever you perceived was real, truly out there in the external world. It's not an illusion, hallucination, dream or all in your mind, only simply as ideas. This is the situation of philosophical dilemma, which has created many rooms for a variety of philosophical debates, mainly between idealism and realism thoughts of philosophical schools. Both idealism and realism as philosophical terms deal with the relationship between our minds and the world. Idealism is the view that things exist only as ideas, with no reality as material objects outside of the mind. Realism is the view that objects exist in themselves independently of our consciousness of them. The debate between realism and idealism forms one of the recurrent problems and oldest debates in philosophy, dating back to classical Greece and probably too much older religious and spiritual traditions around the world. According to the ancient scenario, it had created a rift between the Greek philosopher Plato and his student Aristotle. In Raphael's famous painting, The School of Athens, which you can see on the slide, the great painter portraits dozens of philosophers all debating and conversing together on the footsteps of a huge marble doorway. At the center of the painting, Aristotle and Plato are standing together, and they have been interpreted as arguing about realism. Plato is indicating up towards the sky, towards the realm of abstractions and forms, of which our world is merely a shadow. Aristotle, in total disparity, is gesticulating towards the ground, arguing that truth is right here, all around us. Therefore, there is a need for proper rationalization and explanation to these philosophical schools of thoughts about their origin, proponents, aims and contemporary implications. So, this module is designed in providing some elucidation to the philosophical schools of thoughts called idealism and realism from the perspective of history of Western philosophy. So, we start first with idealism. Idealism is the oldest system of philosophy known to man. Its origin go back to ancient India in the east and to Plato 400 BC in the west. From that point as yet, idealism has been a dominant philosophical influence to our society. Even though idealism is not as studied as it was before, it's still alive in some areas like contemporary religious studies and some aspects of modern philosophy. Idealism is a philosophical approach that has as its central tenet that idea or thought is the only true fundamental reality, the only thing worth knowing, and anything in the outside world as a matter has no existence, constantly changing, unstable, imperfect and uncertain. Thus, only real things are mental entities, not physical things, which exist only in the sense that they are perceived. Idealism believes in redefined wisdom. It is based on the view that reality is a world within a person's mind. It believes that truth is in the consistency of ideas and that goodness is an ideal state to strive to attain. The two basic varieties of idealism are metaphysical idealism, which states idea to be the ultimate reality, and epistemological idealism, which holds that in the process of knowing the mind can grasp only the psychic or that its objects are conditioned by their perceptibility. In its metaphysics, idealism is thus directly opposed to materialism, the view that the basic substance of the world is matter and that it is known primarily through and as material forms and process. In its epistemology, it is opposed to realism, which holds that in human knowledge, objects are grasped and seen as they really are, in their existence outside and independently of the mind. To the idealist, God is the source of all knowledge. Some of the most articulated idealists include René Descartes, Immanuel Kant, Friedrich Hegel, George Berkeley, and Leibniz. So first we start with Platonic idealism. Plato, father of idealism, a Greek philosopher of the 4th century BC, was a student of Socrates and a teacher of Aristotle. Operated a school named the Academy in Athens. Platonic idealism generally refers to Plato's theory of forms or doctrine of ideas. Plato held that the realm of ideas to be absolute reality, and he uses dialectical method. That is, all thinking begins with a thesis as exemplified in the Socratic dialogues. Its main doctrine is that the objects of our thoughts constitute the ultimate and eternal reality. To him, man is expected to primarily concern himself with search for the truth. However, he notes that since the truth is perfect and eternal, it cannot be found in the world of matter, which is constantly changing and imperfect. Plato believed that by correcting their thoughts and discovering knowledge already there since birth, humans could be improved from within. Idealism focuses on reasoning and how a person can bring knowledge up from inside of himself. In this view, the world exists solely in the minds of people, and that ultimate truth relies on a constancy of ideas. The more perfect our ideas become, therefore, the better we can serve the world. To him, the physical world is the manifestation of some great spirit behind it. Plato states in his famous book, The Republic, two types of worlds, namely spiritual or mental world, which is eternal, permanent, orderly, regular and universal, and the world of appearance, which is experienced through sight, touch, smell, taste and sound, that is changing, imperfect and disorderly. This division is often referred to as the duality of mind and body. To understand truth, one must pursue knowledge and identify with the absolute mind. Plato also believed that the soul is fully formed prior to birth and is perfect at one with the universal being. For Euchega, Plato makes the point that the truth of anything does not consist in the world of sense perception, because such a world is transitory. Plato's idealism is linked to his belief that true knowledge can only be derived from the world of forms. What Plato is saying, in effect, is that ultimate reality is mental and not susceptible to sense perception, which is a common perspective shared by all idealists. Moving on, now we will discuss Berkeleyan immaterialist thesis or idealism. As stated by George Berkeley, all the choir of heaven and furniture of earth, in a word, all those bodies which compose the frame of the world have not any subsistence without a mind. Idealism in the modern world owes its development to philosophers such as George Berkeley. George Berkeley was of the opinion that the material world exists because there is a mind to perceive it, and that things which are not within the conceptual framework of the human mind cannot be deemed real. He does not deny that objects exist, but that their existence on the physical realm is as long as there is a mind to perceive them. It is important to be clear about just what the Berkeleyan immaterialistic thesis entails. Specifically, it is the thesis that the physical world is ultimately mind dependent. Berkeley's argument for this claim begins with the observation that physical objects are nothing more than their perceivable qualities. Because perceivable qualities are essentially ideas, a physical object is really nothing more than a collection of ideas. Now, of course, ideas are mind dependent, therefore each physical object, in fact the entire cosmos, is mind dependent. That is to say, when it comes to physical object, esse est percipi, to be is to be perceived. But this is not the whole of Berkeleyan thesis, nor even the most important part, because there are also the spirits who do the perceiving. Thus, the complete Berkeleyan idealist thesis is esse est percipi aut percipere. To be is to be perceived or to be a perceiver. For Berkeley, the physical world is real as any realist would affirm, in the sense that it is not dependent on the existence of any finite mind. Physical objects are indeed mind dependent, but the mind upon which they always and ever depend is the infinite divine mind, that is God. Repeatedly, though through the principles and three dialogues, Berkeley emphasizes that physical bodies are nothing but collection of qualities or modes that are mixed or blended together to constitute a single object. In the principles, Berkeley plainly asserts there is not any other substance than spirit or that which perceives. Elsewhere, he elaborates on this point, noting that given the passivity of ideas, there must be an active cause for them. It must therefore be a substance, but it has been shown that there is no corporeal or material substance. It remains therefore that the cause of ideas is an incorporeal active substance or spirit. Now, we will ponder upon Kantian Transcendental Idealism. As stated by Immanuel Kant, all our knowledge begins with the senses, proceeds then to the understanding and ends with reason. There is nothing higher than reason. Further, he says, I understand by the transcendental idealism of all appearances the doctrine that they are altogether to be regarded as mere representations and not as things in themselves. And accordingly, that space and time are only sensible forms of our intuition, but not determinations given for themselves or conditions of objects as things in themselves. As mentioned in the critique quoted from Guer and Wood, translation 1998. Kant's three major volumes are entitled Critiques, and his entire philosophy focuses only on applying his critical method to philosophical problems. The correct method in philosophy, according to Kant, is not to speculate on the nature of the world around us, but to perform a critique of our mental faculties, investigating what we can know, defining the limits of knowledge, and determining how the mental process by which we make sense of the world affect what we know. This change in method represents what Kant calls a Copernican revolution in philosophy. Just as Copernicus turned astronomy on its head in the 16th century by arguing that the sun and not the earth is the center of the solar system, Kant turns philosophy on its head by arguing that we will find the answers to our philosophical problems in an examination of our mental faculties rather than in metaphysical speculation about the universe around us. One part of this revolution is the suggestion that the mind is not a passive receptor, but that it actively shapes our perceptions of reality. Another is a general shift which remains to this day from metaphysics towards epistemology. That is, the question of what reality actually consists of has become less central than the question of what we can know about reality and how we can know it. Idealism was a major force in German philosophy from 1780s to the 1840s. The philosopher Immanuel Kant developed the philosophical doctrine of transcendental idealism. Although material things exist in some form, human beings only experience the appearances of things and remain separated from things in themselves. Kant proposed a philosophy where he said that reality exists independently of human minds, but its knowledge is inherently unknowable to men because of sensory filters in our consciousness. These filters hampers our ability to see the thing in itself, and thus our ultimate perception of things is always through the mind's fixed frame of reference. Kant's emphasis on the role of our mental faculties play in shaping our experience implies a sharp distinction between phenomena and noumena. Noumena are things in themselves, the reality that exists independent of our mind, whereas phenomena are appearances, reality as our mind makes sense of it. According to Kant, we can never know with certainty what is out there, since all our knowledge of the external world is filtered through our mental faculties. We can know only the world that our mind presents to us. That is, all our knowledge is only knowledge of phenomena, and we must accept that noumena are fundamentally unknowable. Idealism is the name given to the various strands of philosophy that claim the world is made up primarily of mental ideas, not of physical things. Kant differs from many idealists in that he does not deny the existence of an external reality and does not even think that ideas are more fundamental than things. However, he argues that we can never transcend the limitations and the contextualization provided by our minds, so that the only reality we will ever know is the reality of phenomena. Moving on, last but not the least, under idealism, we will discuss Hegelian absolute idealism. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, German philosopher, is one of the creators of German idealism. Hegelianism is a collective term for schools of thought following Hegel's philosophy, which can be summed up by saying that the rational alone is real, which means that all reality is capable of being expressed in rational categories. His goal was to reduce reality to a more synthetic unity within the system of transcendental idealism. Hegel emphasizes three major facets in his theory in his three most famous books, namely Phenomenology of Mind, Logic and Philosophy of Right, Logic, Nature and Spirit. Further, he maintained that if one applied his logical system perfectly, one would arrive at the absolute ideas, which is similar to Plato's unchanging ideas, but dissimilar with Hegel's notion of logic, which necessarily includes change, development and movement. Even absolute ideas is the final stage only as it concerns thought process, because absolute ideas have an antithesis, that is nature. Nature was considered to be the opposite of the absolute ideas. Ideas and nature together form the absolute spirit, which is manifested by the history, art, religion and philosophy. Hegel's idealism is in the search for final absolute spirit. Examining any one thing required examining or referring to another thing. Hegel's thinking is not as prominent as it once was because his system led to the glorification of the state at the expense of individuals. Hegel thought that to be truly educated, an individual must pass through various stages of the cultural evolution of mankind. Additionally, he reasoned that it was possible for some individuals to know everything essential in the history of humanity. Finally, in short, in Hegel's philosophical education, he believed that only mind is real and that human thought, through participation in the universal spirit, progresses toward a destined ideal by a dialectical process of resolving opposites through synthesis, and can be summarized in the following points. Reality is the product of thought. World is thought externalized. Absolute is not a thing in itself or transcendent force. And last, absolute is the world process itself. Now we will discuss realism again from Western perspective. Realism asserts two fundamental things about the world. First, that objects outside our mind have existence. Second, that objects outside our minds are independent from our minds. That is, that facts about these objects are true or false regardless of our opinions or beliefs. Realism discusses three basic questions of philosophy. That is, what is good? What is fact? What is reality? In the first question, realism discusses the nature of knowledge, known as entomology. The second question is about the nature of value, known as epistemology. The third question, the educational philosophy, discusses about the nature of beauty, known as axiology. Reality is that which is never changing, permanent. Realism believes in the world as it is. It is based on the view that reality is what we observe. It believes that truth is what we sense and observe, and that goodness is found in order of the laws of nature. To understand this complex philosophy, one must examine its development, beginning from the classical times up to the 19th century. Aristotle was a major exponent of this school of thought. Philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, Francis Bacon, John Locke, Alfred North Whitehead and Bernard Russell have contributed much to realism ideology. First, we start with Aristotelian realism. Aristotle was a great Greek philosopher. Aristotle believed in the direct observation of nature, and in science he thought that theory must follow fact. He considered philosophy to be the discerning of the self-evident, changeless first principles that form the basis of all knowledge. Logic was Aristotle the necessary tool of any inquiry, and the syllogism was the sequence that all logical thought follows. He introduced the notion of category into logic and taught that reality could be classified according to several categories, that is, substance, the primary category, quality, quantity, relation, determination in time and space, action, passion or passivity, position and condition. According to Aristotelian realism, a tree can exist without matter in someone's mind or head, but no matter can exist without form. As a result, Aristotle used syllogism, which is a process of ordering statements about reality in a logical systematic form. This systematic form would include a major premise, a minor premise and a conclusion. The problem with this thinking is that if one premise is false, the conclusion cannot be accurate. For example, a famous but a simplistic version of a syllogism goes as follows. Deductive: all men are mortal, major premise. Ram is a man, minor premise. Therefore, Ram is mortal, conclusion. Under inductive, Dr. Avila is mortal, Dr. Eugen is mortal, Dr. Wilsoner is mortal. All three are men, therefore men are mortal. Aristotle also taught that knowledge of a thing beyond its classification and description requires an explanation of causality, or why it is. He posited four causes or principles of explanation. First, material cause, the substance of which the thing is made. Second, formal cause, its design. Third, efficient cause, its maker or builder. And last, final cause, its purpose or function. In modern thought, the efficient cause is generally considered the central explanation of a thing. But for Aristotle, the final cause had primacy. Through these different forms, Aristotle demonstrated that matter was constantly in a process of change. He believed that God, the ultimate reality, held all creation together. Organization was very important in Aristotle's philosophy. It was his thought that human beings as rational creatures are fulfilling their purpose when they think, and thinking are the highest characteristic. To Aristotle, each thing had a purpose, and education's purpose was to develop the capacity for reasoning. According to Osborne and Craver, the most central thread of realism is the principle or the thesis of independence. This thesis holds that reality, knowledge and value exist independently of human mind. The world of ideas and matter defined in idealism by Plato and Socrates do not exist separately and apart from each other for realists. Realists contend that material things can exist whether or not there is a human being around to appreciate or perceive them. The basic principle of realist is that matter is the ultimate real. This means that the material things we see in this world, such as trees, animals, houses, hills, mountains and people, are real. The realist maintains that these are not simply ideas in the mind of the people. They exist and are independent of the mind. Finally, we can recapitulate our Aristotelian influence in the following way. First, recognizing the need to study nature, using logical process to examine the external world, organizing things into hierarchies, emphasizing the rational aspects of human nature. Now we have Saint Thomas Aquinas. As quoted by him, nothing is in the world, in the intellect, that was not first in the senses. Thomas Aquinas incorporated Greek ideas into Christianity by showing Aristotle's thought to be compatible with church doctrine. In his system, reason and faith, that is revelation, form two separate but harmonious realms whose truths complement rather than oppose one another. God made it possible to acquire true knowledge so that we may know Him better. He pursued a lifelong passion to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Christianity. He accepted Aristotle's view that a human has matter and a mind or a body and a soul. Aristotle believed that our highest good comes through thinking. Aquinas took this to mean that because we are children of God, our best thinking should agree with Christian tenets. Aquinas' realism came to the forefront because he held that human reality is not only spiritual or mental but also physical and natural. We can precise Saint Aquinas' belief in the following manner. God is the ultimate teacher. Only God can touch the soul. A teacher can only point the way to knowledge. Teaching is a way to serve humankind. It is a part of God's work. Leading the student from ignorance to enlightenment is one of the greatest services one person can give to another. The soul possesses an inner knowledge. The major goal of education was the perfection of the human being and the ultimate reunion of the soul with the God. Moving on, we have John Locke. John Locke believed that there are no such things as innate ideas. The mind of a newborn baby is a tabula rasa or blank slate at the time of birth. Information and knowledge were added later on through experience, perception and reflection. He felt that what we know is what we experience. His philosophy of realism can be put forth in the following points. First, there are no innate ideas in the mind. All our knowledge comes to us by the way of experience. The mind is for the most part passive in expressing the natural world. Second, primary qualities exist in the external world just as we experience them. Secondary qualities are different in our experience from what they are in their potential forms in the object. They are yet caused in us by the external world. The external world makes its impression upon our minds by somehow setting impulses in motion, which reach our minds through the gateway of the senses. Now, after so far discussion, we can shortlist differences between realism and idealism. In the varied field of epistemology, metaphysics and cosmology, idealism and realism present two almost completely differing theories. They differ in the following respect. First, difference in epistemology. According to idealism, objects have no existence apart from their ideas, while according to realism, objects have an existence independent of any knowledge of them. Idealism maintains that qualities are imposed on the object by the mind, while realism holds that qualities are a part of the object. Now, according to idealism, objects are known indirectly through the medium of their ideas, but realism holds the objects are known directly. In idealism, it is believed that objects appear differently to different people, but in realism, it is believed that objects are universal. Now, we will discuss differences in metaphysics. From the metaphysical standpoint, realism and idealism differ in the following respects. According to the idealist, the universe exists within the mind, while realists are of the opinion that the natural world is independent of the mind. The idealists believe in the synthesis between men and nature, while the realists deny the existence of any such synthesis. Difference in cosmology. Idealism and realism differ in the following respects on the question of cosmology. According to idealism, the mechanistic explanation of the universe is not adequate, while realists propound this mechanistic explanation. In explaining creation, the idealist lays the stress on the normative and social sciences, while the realists rely more heavily on the natural sciences in their explanation of creation. Idealism stresses the mental and the spiritual in its explanation of the world, and realism the material and the physical. This is all about idealism versus realism from Western perspective. Thank you.